So good morning, everybody. This is Kelley Woods in Anacortes, Washington, and I'm welcoming you to the latest episode of our Hypnotic Men interviews. And today I have somebody really special, someone I am so happy to claim as a good friend, and also a resource. This man is someone who I go to for anything on the topic of NLP and also on a lot of relationship advice. This is another area of his expertise. And so I'm so pleased to introduce Kevin Cole. And I'm just going to pin Kevin here now. Everybody can see his handsome face. And you'll probably be surprised if you haven't met Kevin and you're just seeing him for the first time to hear that he has 24 years of experience in hypnosis and NLP. And you might wonder, well, did you start right out of the birth canal or what happened? Hi, Kevin, welcome.
Yes, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me here. And yes, don't let the baby face fool you. I just turned 47, which it feels so weird to say. It always feels weird to say another year, but yeah, January 8th turned 47. So been doing this stuff for a while. Yeah, it's great to be here. Truly an honor. I literally everything that you shared about me, I could say mirror back to you, as you already know, and others can know now, especially with working with kids. I wouldn't be working with kids nearly as much as I do now because there was a time where I was really intimidated by it. I was like, oh, but they're kids. I mean, what do I do? And of course, I reached out to you and you helped me to realize how easy it is and how it's actually usually easier. So yeah, I consider you a great mentor as well. So yeah.
Thank you. So the topic of this event here today is NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming. And, what I would really like to do today is kind of explore some of the concepts, of course, but get an overall impression of maybe where NLP comes from. You've been teaching NLP certification courses for years. I know you even travel internationally doing that. And, I've never taken a formal course. I'll admit that in my 18 years, but I've taken, small bit courses here and there that weren't even always promoted as NLP, and I've read a ton. But, will you just give a little bit of your background? How did you get intrigued by NLP, and what's kind of your history of it?
Yeah. Well, I first got into NLP, honestly, not to be helping other people. I mean, I've always cared about other people. I've always done whatever I could to help other people out. But I originally got into NLP for my own personal development. I needed this stuff. And because of how fast working most NLP techniques are, I got such a profound taste of how much control I have over the way that I feel, how everybody has over the way they feel when they know how. And so I just learned like a couple of really simple techniques. And for me at the time, they were just absolutely transformational. And I just became hooked and just delved into this stuff, started learning more and more, quote unquote, mastered it. I say quote unquote because my belief is that mastery is a continued journey. It's not like, oh, I mastered that, that's done. But yeah, and then after about 7 years of really working on it with myself and enough people saying, you really should be helping other people with this stuff, eventually they kind of talked me into it. And I was like, okay, maybe I am meant to be helping other people with this stuff, and haven't looked back since.
Fantastic. I think that the real convincer, we were talking about this earlier, is when we experience change through some modality. That's when we become the true believers, and I think the best advocate for it. And, even some of the research shows, for example, that when a doctor believes in the treatment that he's prescribing, it's even more effective.
Yeah, big time.
And
big time.
So, one of the things that I've it took me a while and I struggled with was how to present NLP to my clients, how to briefly define it. And I've heard all kinds of different definitions. How do you frame it?
Honestly, I don't. I don't tell them anything. If they ask me about NLP, like, they've researched me and they're like, oh, I see that you do NLP, then I'll get into it. But quite honestly, for most of them, I use a tremendous amount of NLP. Most of what I use is NLP, but I don't try to explain it to them. I don't try to frame it to them. I just frame it as hypnosis. Because, and that's quite accurate, by the way. A common misconception is that NLP isn't hypnosis. To put it nicely, they're wrong. The vast majority of NLP techniques are very, very hypnotic in nature. But in general, I don't try to explain it to. It's people ask me to explain what NLP is, to give a simple definition of NLP, and my usually response is, do you have 16 days for me to explain it to you? Because that's about how long it takes me to teach NLP, because there's so much to it. But yeah, in general, if they ask me, then I will explain to them, and I will share with them. I'll say that NLP is a gigantic set of tools, techniques, philosophies, and methodologies, many of them that have been around since the beginning of time, but have been put together in a very, very specific structure that can help just about anyone be, do, and or have just about anything they desire in life within logical reason. That's what I usually share with them. And it's obviously pretty vague because there's so much to it. It's like trying to explain the human body. It's like, so explain to me, how the human body works. Okay, that's going to take a little bit of time. So there's a lot to NLP.
Okay, yeah. I appreciate that. In other words, it's like this treasure box, and you're going to delve into it and just show some of these gems and be able to utilize them. Exactly. I recently worked with a salesman who came to me for wanting to quit chewing tobacco. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite NLP techniques is the anchor collapse. And a lot of people are familiar with the one I learned from Michael Elner, the emotional detox technique. Yep. And I call these things wonderful state shifters. And so I present it in that view that I'm going to teach you how you can take command of how you're feeling, how you're thinking and feeling and responding to life very quickly. Mm-hmm. And but for some clients like this one, who's a salesman, I do talk about NLP. I told them that this comes from the art and the science of NLP, and this is a process of influence. And politicians use NLP. There's a document floating around on the internet based on one of Obama's speeches that, it's quite lengthy. It just dissects it with all the NLP inside of it. Mm-hmm. And salesmen study NLP, and this client's eyes got big. He'd never heard of it, but of course he wants to improve his sales. Mm-hmm. And I said, these techniques help these people influence others, but I want to teach it to you so that you can influence yourself. And so it's within this frame of getting mastery and command over, those thoughts and feelings and responses that I present NLP. And it keeps it rather simple, but also gives them something that will give it even more credibility.
Yeah, so absolutely.
That's kind of my take on it. But it took me a while to develop that because I wanted to say something beyond this is a hypnotic technique. And of course I do say that too. I say, this is a form of self-hypnosis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in what you did so eloquently is that you didn't try to explain NLP. You found, you go figure, we're client centered. Go figure, meaning that, of course, you're Kelley Woods. You've been doing this for a very long time. But nonetheless, yeah, if it's useful, like for example, when working with phobias, I will oftentimes say that, okay, well, from NLP, this is what NLP is known for. One of the things that really built up its reputation is how fast it can help people to overcome phobias. So I'll mention that in that regard. Or in sales, in regards to teaching about buying strategies and things like that. Lots of different things. But I'll usually just, as you did, I'll usually just say something along the lines of, this comes from NLP, which is really well known for, and you fill in the blank. So yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely. Yeah.
And by the way, to participants here, if you have any specific questions for Kevin, we have a chat box. So you can certainly post it there, and then I'll let him know. So why should hypnotists study and use NLP?
Because I say so. No. No.
That is an technique, by the way.
Well, actually, that is an NLP technique in regards to the language. The word "because" is large. You just fill in the blank with that. That said, because it's very well structured. And it's NLP is known for fast working techniques. Okay. We don't mess around with things that take a long time. Okay. We really focus on things that are fast. And it's in comparison to very traditional, and I'm going to overgeneralize here. To be clear with that, because people are gonna be like, you're generalizing. I'm like, yes, I am. I'm going to generalize for a moment. But compared to very, very traditional hypnosis, very traditional scripted hypnosis, and or just, one methodology, regression to cause being an example. NLP is such a gigantic toolbox of so many different tools that when learned correctly, you'll know how to use flexibly. Because it's not about, trying to script the specific technique and try to cram what technique into, or rather to working with the client. You still need to be very client-centered, and you need to know how to be flexible with it. I like to say that you need to understand the art behind the science. Which Scott Sandlin actually has been saying something recently that I agree with, but I kind of wish I didn't, because it's messing up my slogan. Is the art behind the science. I forget what he refers to it says, but he says it's not so much an art. I forget what it is, but he's right, and I just don't remember what it is. But I still use the term art just the same, because we have to be flexible. We have to be very client-centered with it.
I appreciate that. I think that utilizing who the client is and what they bring is so important, and that's really what I love about NLP, is that there's such a broad variety of approaches that can be used. And often when a client just says one thing, like my ex-tobacco chewing salesman, I knew right away what was going to work for him. Or if I have, a performing artist, I'm going to go and use that wonderful director technique. And so it's like our own brain immediately does that lovely transderivational search and latches onto the technique that we've either used or read about. Peggy asked, is there any condition you should not use NLP for?
Very good question. In my opinion, and my bold statement here is no, there isn't. Now, are there things that you should refer out for? Yeah, absolutely. If somebody's coming to you saying that, okay, I'm paranoid schizophrenic, and the voice of Satan is telling me to go steal a donut, to say something nice, whatever. Probably a good idea to refer out. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that NLP can't help with, so long as we're being responsible practitioners. Good question, though. Very good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And in fact, recently in our Hypnotic Women group, someone had asked, and that's kind of what prompted me to ask you to be on this webinar, about using NLP anchoring techniques for helping a client who has addiction. And And so they weren't sure if that would be effective. What's your take on that?
Oh, it'd be very effective in so many different ways. I mean, there's so many different things. Even just uh, understanding how to help people to tap into what feelings they're trying to get from whatever it is that they're addicted to, and utilizing different NLP techniques to help them to I like to say, turn up their neurology, teach them how to turn up their neurology, to use a jargonistic NLP term, turn up those submodalities, which is just a fancy term for learning ways of feeling good, to simplify it, because trying to explain submodalities in a short period of time is a little bit tricky. But yeah, I mean, it's fantastic for helping people to overcome addictions, including helping them to a technique that you and I have kind of developed very recently, actually, to really enhanced in different ways, is what we call the super swish, is what we call it, and that's fantastic for helping people to change the way they feel about specific addictions. Well, let me paint the picture this way. Gambling addictions, okay? What is happening in the person's mind is that they are so focused on those wins. They're so focused on the wins, and they're seeing the bright, colorful lights and the sounds and all that sort of stuff. But they push out into the distance the negative stuff. They push out the losses, the wife filing for divorce. They push out all of that stuff. And with just about every addiction, we're doing the same kind of thing. Okay. And also throw in that, in my opinion, is probably, maybe a fraction of a percent of a exception to the rule on this, but where there's an addiction, there's somebody that's actually craving connection and love, in my opinion. And NLP is a fantastic way of helping people to experience those feelings. Something that I like to think I'm fairly well known for is a technique that I teach that I didn't create out of thin air. I adapted it from Leslie LeBeau, formerly known as Leslie Cameron Bandler, Richard Bandler's first wife. But a technique that I teach called seeing yourself through the eyes of love, which is an NLP technique. Which helps people to really feel that love, that self-love. So yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a zealot, so I can go on for days.
Well, I'm in total agreement with you, and so are many of the world's experts on addiction, that it's the disconnect from feelings of love and acceptance that's driving that problem. And your process, when I first experienced it myself, you sent me a demo audio years ago of seeing yourself through the eyes of love. I just found so profound and moving. It was fabulous. And so I've always been a great fan of it. And thank you for creating that, even though it was a spinoff of Leslie's. But I think that many of our members of our group have really enjoyed it too and used it. And what I love about many of these techniques is that we can make them our own. We can play with them. We can bring them to an even more expansive, more creative level by not just using the structure, but sometimes reverse engineering, like we've been doing with that super swish. And so it makes it really fun. It makes it interesting, and we don't have to get bored, and we don't get stuck into doing just rote automatic work. Well, one of the things that I love about NLP is the ability to use it in conversational hypnosis, but also to use it in more formal hypnotic experiences. It'll work. And sometimes I'll even think about, I might have some process that comes from NLP, and I know it's going to work maybe in my pre-talk to set the stage, to even use as a convincer to show people how easy it is for them to execute change. But then if I use it in the more formal states, it's almost superpowered. There's something that happens there. And do you know why that is? What's going on?
I can just theorize, which is just simply that they're not over analyzing it. It's just when they're in more of a trance, they're in more of an experiential. They're more open to experience. So they're not analyzing it. They're not simply put, they're not thinking as much. Um, and both can be extremely useful. And I love the fact that you mentioned the value of reverse engineering things. What's one of the best ways to really understand something? To tear it apart and put it back together. Okay, then you really understand the mechanics of it. And yeah, when we understand something backwards and forwards, yeah, we really understand it. Then we're not just reading a script. We really do understand the art behind the techniques, behind the science of it. So yeah, I think it's really valuable to kind of reverse engineer this stuff. On that note, it reminds me of the first time I ever used the NLP technique called mapping across for a phobia. Now, a lot of people would say, you can't use mapping across for a phobia. That's for taking like to dislike in regards to foods and things like that. And they're right. You know, it's like, if you want to, for those that don't know, mapping across is very commonly used as kind of NLP's version of an aversion technique. Okay, which I know some people are very much against aversion techniques. I don't mean having somebody imagine they're going to get cancer because they smoke. It's not like that. It's just like kind of grossing them out to a certain food, for example, at their request, is a common use for mapping across. But I was teaching a course once, and a student of mine said, could this be used for phobias? Okay, because he happened to have a fear of flying. And I said, let's find out. And did it with him. You can actually YouTube it for those that are curious. It's actually on there on YouTube. Just YouTube Kevin Cole flying phobia mapping across, something like that on YouTube, and you'll find it. I literally made that up on the spot. You know, he reported, and we really did. That's the only technique that we used during that entire class to address his fear of flying. It's the only one. And he reported back, if memory serves, on a scale of 1 to 10 in regards to being fearful, where he would normally be at like at least an 8 or a 9. I think he said that the highest he got was like a 3, and he was very, very happy about that. You know, so you know, that's the value in really letting yourself, you know, play, be creative with this stuff, and understand, you know, the mechanics of it, the structure of it. And how do you do that? By tearing things apart and reverse engineering and just being creative. So yeah.
Okay, so with that in mind, do you think it's safe to do that experimenting with clients, with paying clients?
When you feel comfortable, like when you, like I wouldn't do it with everything, but you know, once you've, you know, when you're like, you know, let's play around with this a little bit, let yourself, by the way, recognize that as long as you understand multiple different techniques as opposed to just one. If you're, you know, no disrespect, but if you've been taught like one, I know there's certain people that teach one way of doing things, no disrespect, I'll just be blunt. If that's all that you know, you're kind of screwed. But as long as you know different approaches, the thing is, you virtually can't get it wrong. I'm going to give you guys you're going to love this. Okay. Some of you might already be doing this and be like, oh, I already knew that. But if you didn't, you're going to love this. Here's the thing. If you want to try something new and you don't know how it's going to go, try it. If it doesn't work, then just simply say, okay, now the next step we're going to do. Don't tell them, oh, shoot, that didn't work at all. Just say, so now the next step, and then just do something else. Okay. And if you have to do 5 steps, so be it. The client doesn't know. They don't know that there's, you know, yeah.
I love that. And because you're already in this structured thing, then you've got the next step. And there's always a next step, even to the point where you're, you know, shaking their hand and saying goodbye at the door. Well, pre-COVID. Now we just
Exactly.
wave.
Exactly. So to give a more clean example of that. So let's say the mapping across thing totally just, oh my gosh, didn't work at all. Then I would say, okay, the next step, and then I would segue into the quote unquote fast phobia cure. I say quote unquote because we're not supposed to use the word cure, but that's traditionally what it's called. You just segue. If it's totally not working, segue into another technique. And again, that's where value comes into play of knowing different techniques, whether they be NLP techniques or more traditional hypnosis techniques or techniques that are totally different.
Sure, you could even do the rewind technique or the theater technique.
Exactly, which is the fast phobia.
No.
Yeah, exactly. That's just the fast phobia, quote unquote, cure. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of protocols that have been just rehashed and renamed and remarketed under these different names, but they really are essence of NLP. And sometimes that can be frustrating for people because they think they're going to learn something new, and it turns out that they already knew it. But what do you suggest that people do to kind of be able to suss that out in advance? Are there any clues they could look for?
To suss it out in advance in regards to
Making a decision on a training that advertises the newest piece of gold.
Gotcha. Well, a couple different things. First of all, recognize that there is nothing new. What is this? In yoga, it's what's called a mudra. Okay, so it's called a mudra. You know what mudra means in modern English? To seal in. What's an anchor?
Yes.
Anchor. You're sealing in. So what are you doing when you're doing this and I almost said mantra. What the heck is it? Mudra. You get into a relaxed state, okay, and you do this. This helps to seal it in, so it becomes easier to get back into that state. Okay. Now there are those that will say, "Well, Kevin, there is more to it," and they're probably right. But in my opinion, most of this is just an anchor. Okay.
And mudras are ancient.
Beginning of time. It's been around since the beginning of time. So now I forget the question. How do you suss out in regards to what was the question again?
Well, I was wondering if maybe you had some tips to help people decide whether a training
That's right.
was worthy.
Yes, thank you. My opinion is have a conversation with the trainer. That is the number one best thing you can do. And if and there's exceptions to this, there's certainly exceptions to this, but if you can't talk to the trainer, in my opinion, it's kind of a red flag. Okay, but there are exceptions to that. Okay, Richard Bandler, for example. Okay, pretty brilliant guy. Okay, you can't just call him up and say, I want to talk to you. Okay, it's probably not going to happen. But for the vast majority, in my opinion, if you can't talk to the trainer, that's kind of a red flag. But just ask lots of questions. And if they get offended, if they're like, well, how dare you ask me? How dare you question my authority? Whatever. My opinion, that's probably not the person to train with, in my opinion. And you can get a good read just by asking questions and just, check in with their congruency. But there's a lot of, I'll go ahead and just for the hell of it, I'll point out names, but I'll also say good things about them. Andrew Austin has a technique that he teaches, IEMT. I forget what that's an acronym for, but it's definitely not out of thin air. It's a combination of NLP's eye movement integration is what it's called. And EMDR, okay, which EMDR was actually learned from, or it was originally taught by Francine Shapiro, and she actually studied directly under John Grinder, who's the co-creator of NLP. And she asked him, asked him about a friend of hers who had suffered from a specific trauma. And he taught her a specific eye movement integration exercise of moving her eyes around in different quadrants, different directions, which helps us to change the way we feel about things. It's incredibly simple, really. Okay. But Francine, maybe she forgot, but according to her story was that she was walking in the forest or the beach one day, I don't remember which, and she just suddenly looked to the left and had this epiphany that somehow by moving our eyes rapidly, it helps us to change the way we feel about things, and can neutralize the emotional charge to trauma. And she's right. She was right. She passed away. So respect to her. But nonetheless, she, in my opinion, whether she consciously or unconsciously, she just, took something that she already learned from someone else and then just rebranded it and so on. Andrew Austin, which, by the way, I from my understanding, I haven't taken the training, but from my understanding, Andrew's course is supposed to be excellent. And because it's online nowadays, I think it's very affordable as well. So take his IEMT. I'll even recommend it.
That's been one of the great frames about a pandemic, is that so many of the live trainings have been turned into affordable and really high quality online trainings. And some of these NLP experts have really been specializing in certain areas. I think about the Andreas family and what the work that they're doing in perspective shifting in their perception, positional. I forget the name of the actual process. I took a training in it, and so much of change work is gaining new perspective and being able to even dissociate from feelings of all kinds. And so these are techniques that we're using in hypnotherapy and not always understanding why they're so effective. And I love that NLP explains that and again provides that structure. And it is important to take and to learn the structure to start with. For example, with the fast phobia cure, I just think of it as FPC. A lot of people do it, but they miss a really important step in the very beginning, which is to associate the person into that phobic state to some degree. And without that, it's just not going to be as effective. And then they wonder why it didn't work. So it's so important to learn those steps and get comfortable with them. So here's a question. What's the best technique, Kevin, to release childhood trauma?
Tell them to get over it. No, I'm kidding. Sorry. I don't mean that at all. As somebody who had their share of childhood trauma. I won't say there is one best tech. Well, I will say there's one best technique. Compassion is the best technique. Okay. That alone is the best technique. But that's obviously not answering the question. I will share some of my favorites. First and foremost, I want to help them to feel amazing in the present moment. I don't just want to help them to feel good. I don't want to just help them feel great. I want to help them to feel amazing in the present moment. And if and when I feel that it's valuable to take them down memory lane, do some form of quote unquote regression work, then I will. I have my particular methodology that I've developed over the years that I call quote unquote time quest transformation, which there's a lot to it, obviously, but the major differences in what I do and traditional regression is that, I will not go down memory lane unless I help them to feel amazing in the present moment first. And and by the way, by doing that, it's not like that younger part of them isn't getting the benefits as well. Okay. That younger part of them is also feeling like, oh, we do get to feel good. And it just automatically neutralizes a lot of that trauma. Oftentimes it neutralizes all of it. But I do find, and some people will disagree with me on this, I do find that there's tremendous benefit in taking those resources that we've given them in the present moment, and then, even though it's not real, but in their mind, they're giving themselves, that younger them, those resources as well. And probably one of the earliest methodologies of working in that way is what many of us know as quote unquote inner child work. I haven't been the biggest fan of very traditional inner child work because I find that it can be too painful, unnecessarily painful, but it's still the same concept of just, communicating with that younger self and giving ourselves that those feelings. So on that note, you mentioned perspective. A great quote that many of us, if not all of us, have heard before is, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. Okay, when we change the perspective of things, the things we prospect, that's not the right way of putting it, changes. Okay, that actually comes, now it usually gets credit from either Wayne Dyer or Deepak Chopra. They're not the ones who said it originally. It was actually a quantum physicist by the name of Max Planck who originally said that. Okay. And so he was actually referring to it on literally a quantum level. Now, don't ask me to explain quantum physics. I'm definitely not that smart. But I like to rephrase it slightly. I always say the original quote first. And by the way, I share this with clients. I say there's a great quote that I love. And this is what I say to my clients. There's a great quote that I love, which is, and it comes from a quantum physicist. I say that because then it adds credibility. But I just simply say, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And then I say to them, I add to them, I say, and I like to add to that a little bit or modify that slightly and say, when we change the way we look at things, the way we feel about them change. And yes, and we could change that perspective. And same thing with childhood trauma. When we change the perspective, and I'll share this, and cut me off, Kelley, if I'm going off too much of a tangent at all. But a metaphor that I share with my clients that I directly steal from Melissa Roth, and then I change it. But I always give her credit for it, obviously. I love her metaphor where she shares, she's not a big fan of doing regression work at all. I shouldn't say at all, but she's not a big fan of it. And I totally respect that. But she says that if you drive over a pothole, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go back to that pothole and be like, why is this pothole here? What's the root cause of this pothole? Let's just go to the mechanic, get the car realigned because it's out of alignment. Let's get it realigned and get back on the road. And I totally love that. But I also see a valuable distinction where if we keep running over this same pothole over and over and over again, she's right. It doesn't make a lot of sense to drive back to that pothole, dig deeper, and say, why is it here? That's just going to create a deeper pothole. And by the way, when we ask why to a question, especially a negative question, it's like doing a Google search. And we're getting thousands of different answers, most of them in the back pages / are unconscious, which is basically just saying, so yeah, here's why you're screwed up. You're screwed up because of this, because of this, because of this, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, well, also with a Google search, most of it isn't accurate. Some of it is, but most of it isn't. Okay. So nonetheless, what I say is that, yes, it can be useful to drive back to it, but not dig deeper into it, but to take a look at it and ask ourselves, what do we need to fill it with? And I help my clients to understand that when it comes to negative memories, including childhood trauma, all that it is it's a younger part of us knocking on the door saying, hey, I still need to feel certain feelings. I still need to feel safe. I still need to feel love, self-love, if you will. I still need to learn how to have fun. What I'm generalizing, or I'm adding, or I'm generalizing certain things that it may be. It could be lots of different things, but that's all that it is. Doesn't matter if it was a bad day or a significant trauma. All of it is what is it that we're still wanting and or needing emotionally that we can give ourselves? What is that pothole needing emotionally that we can fill it with, instead of digging deeper and saying, why is it here, or when exactly did it start and how did it start? We don't need to know any of that. Okay. Yeah. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I was just going to say, it makes sense to me. And I love several of Melissa's pothole metaphors.
Mhm.
And, I want to just skip backwards a little bit in what you said about the importance of starting with helping a person feel good, i.e., creating a resource state. And,
Mhm.
we've had many discussions in our hypnotic women group, and sometimes there'll be new practitioners that don't recognize that term, a resource state. So they've somehow gone through a hypnosis certification course and not had that clarified, or it didn't stick. We know that they learned so much that some of it just isn't quite connecting yet. But, and I work that way, especially with kids. Usually they're presenting with a problem state, kids of all ages. And I want to draw attention to a resource state. And this is such a beautiful place for NLP processes. So let's talk about anchoring.
Mhm.
We just mentioned it a couple times. How would you use anchoring to elicit and make that resource state easily available for a client?
There's really so many different ways, but I'm gonna go ahead and over deliver here. I don't have time to explain how a classic NLP technique called the circle of excellence works, but I will send it directly to you, and you can share it with the hypnotic women, where me demonstrating the circle of excellence. Okay, we won't do any of the
Perfect.
opt-in stuff or anything like that. Although there would be nothing wrong with that. That's called marketing, but we're not going to do that this time. I'll just send it directly to you, and you can post that.
Great.
There's so many different ways, and the circle of excellence certainly isn't my go-to every single time. Um, but nonetheless, what it comes down to, forgive me for being vague, but really what it comes down to is knowing how to do it, knowing the different ways of turning up those submodalities. A common one that many, if not all, listening to this might be familiar with is a spinning technique. Okay, spinning that energy. That is a fantastic way of, I like to say, turning up your neurology, but a fantastic way of just teaching the client on an experiential level, giving them a profound and undeniable experience. Okay, I'm big on that. Just giving them that experience of doing that. And spinning is one of the simpler techniques, some uh, uh, simpler ways of doing that. There's really infinite. Actually, an even simpler way. You want to know how to make people feel amazing?
Yeah.
Take them back to a wonderful memory. There you go. They're going to feel amazing. Okay, I'm not going to literally do it, but if I was to say, Kelley, in a moment I'm going to count from 1 to 3, and when I do, you're going to be remembering one of the most wonderful memories of your entire life. 1, 2, 3. Be there now. Were you indoors or outdoors? Was it daytime or night? Were you by yourself or others around? Now notice I did that with a positive memory. Okay, I originally learned how to do that with traumatic shit, but I don't do that anymore. I originally learned that from Gil Boyne, who's a pioneer in what's called regression hypnotherapy, and he would do that. His common term is what's called affect bridge. I've evolved from that. I don't like doing that for painful things, but will I do it for pleasurable memories? Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm with you there. I'm a great fan of regression for pleasurable memories. Now, sometimes, and I know this has happened to you, it's certainly happened to me. We'll have a client who claims that they can't access any positive memories. For that reason, I learned fairly quickly not to suggest to a client that they go to their happy place, because that frame right there is sometimes an automatic anti-anchor for happiness. But
Yeah.
I found that just being really flexible and maybe lowering the bar a little bit, like a favorite meal, your favorite piece of music, that it can be done to some degree to open that door. Now, I did once have a client, I remember this woman a few years ago. She couldn't get in touch with any of that.
Yeah.
And it was getting ridiculous, so ridiculous that she started to laugh. Ha! We had something.
Exactly.
So we simply anchored that ridiculous absurdity of not having a happy memory in her whole life. And, that was a resource state then that we could build upon. And so we can always find something, we can create it out of thin air if necessary, right?
Absolutely. And two quote unquote case studies come to mind when I think about that. Very different cases, but where people had tremendous trouble accessing emotions at all. One of them was the very first time that I knew of it, worked with somebody that had Asperger's, which is kind of the former term of high functioning autism. I don't know why the DSM got rid of the term. I don't know the logistics of that, but or why. But it was a student of mine who he had the false belief, and limiting belief, that he could not feel emotions at all. And I didn't know, it was the first time I'd consciously worked with somebody with Asperger's. So I didn't have like I certainly didn't have a script, not that I'm a big fan of scripts in that regard anyway, but I didn't know what to do. But I just stayed focused on what he wanted. Well, he wanted to be able to feel emotions. Long story short, one of the things that I did, I was just getting creative. It was this particular one was in a classroom environment. He was a student of mine. And just like with all my students, I don't just want to teach them how to do this stuff. I want them to experience it as well. Okay. I'm a big believer in that for multiple different reasons. But nonetheless, one of the ultimate thing that I went to after, thinking, how am I going to do this? This guy is really, quote unquote Spock-like. And I don't say that to be politically incorrect. I just say it because I think it's a fairly accurate term. But nonetheless, I then just out of the blue, I just remember just thinking, well, you know what? Let me try this. Or I asked myself, I said to myself, what is something that will make just about any man feel emotions? And then it hit me. I was like, feminine energy. And so with great rapport, I asked, the women in the course, in the class, I said, now, if and only if you feel comfortable, and if you don't. No, this isn't about making anything weird, but we all, it's a class, they're all working together, and so there was a good rapport. And I just said for anyone that would feel comfortable, all that I ask is you just simply give this gentleman a wonderful hug in the way that you as a woman knows how to give that absolute feminine energy. Now, some people might say, well, men could do that too. Yes, they could. Absolutely. But nonetheless, it's called feminine energy for a reason. and so what I did was just one at a time. And literally, this guy went from pale white, literally pale white, to just lighting up. And I just kind of like anchored that in, not like by necessarily touching him, but I may have put my hand on his shoulder. I don't remember, to be honest with you. But I just simply kind of pointed him like, yeah, feel that. Oh, that's right. And he did say, I remember him saying, he's kind of like this. He's like, well, that was lovely. And I said, you felt that, didn't you? And he's like, yes. And so helped him to recognize that he was feeling that. Now, that said, another case study that comes to mind was also a student, was a gentleman who, it was interesting. The students were learning all kinds of things. They were learning about eye accessing, lots of different things. And one of the students came up to me and he said, hey, Kevin, I noticed that this gentleman, he doesn't seem to be able to eye access his feelings. And in NLP, we understand that in general, not always, but in general, when we're looking down into our right, that tends to be how we access feelings the most. Now, can we access feelings while looking up or any other direction? Absolutely. But in general, we tend to look down and to the right. We're really feeling things on a strong emotional level. So he said, well, I noticed that the student isn't able to do that. I was like, okay, well, check it out. So they were at this little desk. And so I get he's on one side of the desk, I'm on the other. And then I just simply did a little hand-eye lead. And I said, I'm just curious, have you do this? And he went like this. Okay, I'll kind of look straight into the camera. He went like this, but then he started to shake. Okay. And I don't think there was necessarily sweat, but in my head, I can kind of imagine it, because if I pushed him, he either would have had a panic attack or something serious would have happened. Okay. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's not do that for now. Okay. And I don't remember exactly what I did with him. I think I just, I honestly don't remember what I did with him. But nonetheless, I got him into a positive resource state. And then we're like, okay, well, we're not just going to ignore that. We're going to, deal with that. But quite frankly, simply put, he had experienced a lot of past trauma in multiple different ways. And what he had done unconsciously is his unconscious mind basically said, good feelings, bad feelings, it doesn't matter. They're still feelings. We can't take the chance of feeling them anymore. So he kind of just pushed down those feelings and would not, and so he just wouldn't allow himself to feel anything. Now, some people will say that, oh, okay, anytime somebody's having trouble feeling emotions, that means that it's always childhood trauma. No, it's not. No, it's not. It could be lots of different things. Another case that comes to mind was a gentleman who had a similar thing, but he was in law enforcement. Okay. He was an undercover officer. He couldn't afford to show emotions. So it didn't necessarily have anything to do with childhood trauma. It's just that showing emotions in the wrong place could get him killed. So interesting stuff. I think.
Yeah, and I love hearing those case studies. We have a couple questions. Here's one from Carrie. Are there people who find it more difficult to do NLP? I'm an analytical with auditory digital tendencies and find doing NLP for myself tricky.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you just answered your own question. For some people, it can be more challenging, but it really comes down to, do we want to do it? And I suspect if you're asking the question, you probably do. And my advice on the spot would be, start out having somebody else guide you through it. Because doing it on myself, I find to be trickier than having somebody else guide me through it. At the same time, sometimes it's easier for me to just do it myself if the person's trying to box me into something, which I find far too many do. They're like, no, do it this way. Like, but this is actually working better for me. Which, by the way, if that's the way a client is working, don't try to box them in. I understand that we're supposed to control the session, but there's a difference between controlling the session and being controlling. To give a distinction off the spot. But to do my best to answer, what was her name again? I'm sorry. Who asked the question?
Carrie.
What's
Carrie.
that? Carrie.
Carrie.
Yeah. It's not the best answer, I'll be honest, but my simple answer is be easy about it. Let me give you an experience, one that might be good to start out with. It actually happened to be my first, I shouldn't say my first, but the real game changer for me in the beginning, when I was first learning this stuff, is a simple smiling technique. Okay, simple smiling technique of literally just smiling ear to ear, looking straight up at the ceiling, spreading my arms out like spread eagle. I first got into this line of work because I was super depressed. Okay, I was a train wreck, and it doesn't matter how analytical you are if you're really doing it. Okay, if you really have the physiology, doesn't matter how analytical you are, you will feel happier. It will be very hard to feel depressed, because one of the things you do as well when you're doing this, and then you think about something quote unquote depressing without shifting your physiology. So again, you're doing this stuff and you think about, oh shit, okay, the world's gone fucking crazy. People are fucking going crazy, whatever, capital and all this shit, crazy shit, whatever, it will be very difficult to feel depressed about it when you're doing that. So what I'm getting at is find techniques that don't involve too much thought. A lot of NLP techniques, do require a lot of thought, quite frankly. Maybe don't start out with those. Maybe just go with the ones that are just guaranteed. Okay. What's another example of that? It's guaranteed that when you're breathing properly, when you're breathing from your diaphragm, slow, deep breaths, it's guaranteed you'll feel more emotionally balanced. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's hardwired into the brain. When we're smiling like this, when we're laughing, okay? Kelley wrote a book on what's it called? The laughter yoga one that you wrote with David Berman.
Laughter for the health of it, and that's a great example of about just doing unconditional laughter that's not based on humor. The body responds, all those feel-good chemicals are released, so you feel better emotionally and mentally. It's similar to what we do in hypnosis, where the subconscious doesn't know the difference between real and made up. And so you get the same results. And, I even think of the anchor collapse that I teach as being one that once a person learns it, it transcends having to think about it. They don't even really have to do much beyond deciding whether that unhelpful state is something that they can let go of or not, or they want to, or they need to respond to it. And once they've done that, after a while, it starts to happen automatically, and they move into self-regulation. And, that's what I really like about many of these NLP techniques, is that they are simple tools that we can hand the client so that they can use the power of repetition to incite that neuroplasticity that's going to let those old unhelpful neural pathways recede and displace them with the ones that are going to be helpful to them. And I really like this concept of displacement. I first learned it, I think, from Roger Moore in the context of nutrition, where you bring in more of the good food and it displaces the desire for the junk. Well, we can do that with mental states, emotional states, can't we? And even physical states. When we bring in more of that great stuff, it's going to start crowding out the things that depress us, that promote the anxiety, the pain, all of that. And it's a concept that even kids can understand. And we can show it in so many ways. And when that starts happening automatically for them, then they become the believer too. And it's not homework. It's not a hard task, because it becomes so simple. And I remember several years ago, Kevin, you and I taught a 2-hour course at HypnoThoughts Live on using NLP for people on the autism spectrum, because we both found that that population generally responds really well to NLP. They
Oh
enjoy
yeah, yeah,
the sense of control that they get from it. So,
yeah.
that's a clientele that certainly would be helpful to learn NLP. Joe Moon asked, do you do spinning technique via online, like
Oh,
with your Zoom clients?
oh yeah, oh yeah. I use literally any technique. Obviously, for example, anchoring, can't, touch them on the shoulder or whatever. But you know what? In all honesty, especially in retrospect, it's been forever since I've actually physically anchored anybody in my office. It's been a very long time since I've done that. So yeah, but yeah, there's any technique that I can do in my office, we can do online as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, we're talking here about kinesthetic anchors, but there are other anchors too. And I've learned from Mark Savard years ago a technique of creating a power word that's a power signal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fabulous. People love it. Pretty soon they get their power signal. And I've had the same word for 7 years now, radiant. Whenever I say that word, whenever I see that word, I just glow inside, and it comes out of me too. And so helping a person discover their power word, or maybe it picks them, is a fabulous NLP technique. And often I suggest to clients that they create some tangible anchor for it too. They can do a piece of art. Some people, will discover something in their home or go out and find something that reminds them of it. I remember one time I was doing a session with a woman, and for her, in her mind in hypnosis, it was, her word was a dove, because it gave her that sense of peace. And I'm looking at her, and in the background is this beautiful painting of a dove on her wall. And so, it just shows you how the subconscious mind will step in at any of these kinds of experiences, whether it's conversational or not, and just fill that void there. And I love that.
Absolutely.
So,
And remember, we have 5 senses, arguably 6. But we have 5 senses that we know of. Anchors can be elicited and quote unquote sealed in through any of those 5 senses, any of them. And even though we can't do the quote unquote kinesthetic of actually touching somebody on the shoulder, for example, a common one that I do is I have people take their, sorry, that's probably loud on the mic there, take their hands and place them over the center of their chest. They're self-anchoring. That's all. It's a very powerful one. I don't tell them that, by the way. I don't tell them, so now you're going to seal in an anchor, because now talk about making them analytical. They're like, what does that mean? Do that. But you know what it is, and they're experiencing it. And you can even say to them and say that anytime you place your hands over there, you can let yourself feel these feelings even stronger. Okay. By the way, I'm using some language, NLP, Neuro Linguistic. I said even stronger. If you watch this later, Kelley was, whether consciously, unconsciously, or both, she was using a lot of language in how she was describing things. She was saying that even a child can do this. That's language. It's helping, neuro linguistic language. Yeah.
No, I work a lot in the area of chronic pain, and giving post-hypnotic suggestions for using these anchors is a big part of the recipe. I'm recently working with a composer who has suffered for 25 years from migraines. Mm-hmm. And within our first session, we found a process that gave him relief. Happened to be what I call object imagery, which is simply objectifying that feeling, bringing it out, and then starting to manipulate it and change those submodalities of it. Most people are familiar with this process. I don't know what the NLP particular name is for it, but I call it object imagery. And so this was really useful for him. And so giving that post-hypnotic suggestion is so important during the suggestive process of the hypnosis. And even doing the mental rehearsal of that person once, because one of the best approaches for migraines is to interrupt the oncoming migraine itself.
Mhm.
That's really the best thing. It's much easier to deal with at that point. And so whenever they might feel an aura or any of the different signs that are telling them that something's happening, that they could use whatever technique they've discovered to be helpful. And so running through different scenarios that he had provided to me where he's experienced that, he has a lot of sensitivities to light, to chemicals, to certain foods, and to certain environments, then running through that and showing in his mind how successful he is at just interrupting and pausing that and stopping that. And that simple application within hypnosis of using that anchor, it has really made the difference for him. So we want to make sure that we don't forget that step. That's vital.
Absolutely, especially because where somebody has suffered from chronic pain and has been, poked, prodded, tested, all this sort of stuff, there's somebody that has had a lot of people use a lot of horrible language unintentionally with positive intentions. But the first question is, how's your pain levels? How's your pain levels? How's your pain levels? Are you sure, so you're probably going to be in pain for a while, whatever, yada, 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 yada. These are all hypnotic suggestions. And so we use the power of language, not lying to people, not over promising by saying that, okay, you're going to experience comfort forever and never going to feel pain again, whatever, blah, blah, blah. No. But we can pace with the word. I think maybe it's Scott that I got this from. I think. I know I'm stealing it from somebody. I just don't remember who. But pace with the word pain and lead with the word comfort. They're calling you. They're coming into your office because they're in pain. Pace with that. Use that. But then lead with the word comfort. Does that make sense?
It does to me, and it makes total sense, because sometimes I'll see people say, don't ever mention the word pain. And, that can be discounting the person's experience. Yeah. And, so I love that where you pace with it and then you lead them into the comfort frames. And we're really talking about relational framing here, which is contextual hypnotherapy, which I love. And if anyone's interested, Richard Nongard and I wrote a book on contextual hypnotherapy called Reframing Hypnotherapy, and it has a lot of these concepts in it. You were talking about modeling, which is the circle of excellence. Mm-hmm. And I had an experience years ago where my son was in karate, and we went to Hawaii for the Junior Olympics, and the day before the event, we got permission to work out in the Aloha Bowl, which was pretty cool. So our whole dojo was there. And afterwards, my sensei gave me permission to do a guided imagery with the whole team. And I did a variation of the circle of excellence. I call it the 3 golden rings, where, they have their model, their icon that they choose. And then they gradually, with 3 steps forward, take on the essence of the characteristics and strengths that they want. Mm-hmm. And the next day, the team did great. And we got lots of feedback from them coming that when they walked out in the ring, they took those 3 steps, they became that hero in their mind, and it really helped them. So I asked my son, he was 7 at the time, I said, who did you pick? Did you pick Sensei or Bruce Lee? And he said, Mom, it was my future self. And, I loved that. I thought that was so powerful, that he had the ability to imagine himself as he wanted to be and then use that. And, whether we're having a person map across from what they want to be, or maybe from achievements that they've had in the past, challenges that they've overcome, the strengths and resources that have always been inside of them, It doesn't really matter. Those are all out there, and it's just our job to help them find them. And this mapping across with the NLP process is a perfect venue for it.
Yeah. Well, and it reminds me of a technique that I literally call the NLP technique. It's called the NLP technique. And here's the thing: what do you do? What do you do when you have when you're working with a client and you have to pee? Well, and I get this from Jerry Kine. I never studied with Jerry, but I learned this technique from him just on a YouTube clip or something. Then you simply say to them, so now this is the best part right here. But I want to give you the space to really experience it in the privacy of your own mind. I'm paraphrasing somewhat. The privacy of your own mind. So I'm going to step outside of the room for a moment and let you just fully experience this. So I'm going to step outside the room for just a moment because I need to NLP, and I'm going to let Kelley share some more of her brilliance. But I'm a guy, so I can NLP fast. So I will be right back, and and we'll see you guys in a minute. I'll be right back. I'll be right back. And by the way, word to the wise: make sure to mute yourself when you do this NLP technique. All righty, I'm going to mute myself. I'll be right back.
Oh, well, that's just perfect. I love it. And thank you for all the great comments in our chat box. I love that he mentioned that, like in smoking, we pace with addiction and lead with habit. That's brilliant. I love that. And you know that we never really release and destroy a habit, but we displace it. We create newer, better habits. That's the best path to take. That's fabulous. Well, I know you guys are enjoying Kevin today. He's pretty incredible. And you probably notice I use NLP so much, and I love it because it's really great for kids. They enjoy the creative processes that come out of it. I'd mentioned earlier the director's technique, which if you're not familiar with it, you can find it in our files in the Hypnotic Women group. Or if you're not in our group and you're someone viewing this later, you can contact me and I'll send it to you. But it's a great formula to teach clients because it has just 3 simple steps in it. And basically what they're doing is observing from the audience perspective a scene from the play of their life that depicts how things have not worked for them and how they've struggled. And an actor comes on and they're the director, so they're directing this whole performance. And then the second stage moves into how they want things to go. And then the third stage of it is where they actually associate into it. They go down on that stage and they're living in the first person through these changes. And it affords you so many opportunities to strengthen any techniques that you've given them, to even challenge them when they're going to come up against some kind of obstacle to help them move through that. So you've got the future pacing, and you also have that review of how things haven't worked so they can gain from that third party perspective a little bit more information and knowledge about it. But Kevin and I was talking about the director's technique and how much I love it and how flexible it is. And when I teach it to a client, let them know that you can take this now. These are just the 3 steps. If anything you want to change in your life, just run through it this way. And a lot of clients have told me that they've done exactly that. So I like using things that are instructional in nature and are really equipping our clients with so much more than just coming in and having something done to them.
Yes, absolutely. That's called empowerment. That's empowering the client. It's not just, yes, of course, there's lots of things that we kind of do to our client. It's like, yeah, it's nice when they hear our relaxing voice and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. But yeah, we want to teach them techniques. We want them, Otherwise, it can be kind of like going to a massage therapist or something. It's like the massage therapist does all the work. It feels good, but you still got the same chronic pain because you haven't learned how to change your habits. Um, yeah.
Yeah, we want to teach people something. One of the things that we mentioned earlier is this uh, project that you and I have been working on, the Super Swish. And we're not going to teach it here today, unfortunately, because we want to spend more time on it. But we do have a training coming up in just 3 weeks from today. But let's talk a little bit about, let's kind of give them a little idea of what the Super Swish is, Kevin.
Yeah. Well, originally I've used this technique for probably over a decade. I didn't go, Kelley deserves the credit for a few things actually, but the title of it being one of them. I didn't really have a name for it, honestly. It's just a technique that I used, and I use it a lot with helping people to get over heartbreak, to literally fall out of love, so that it just takes away that emotional charge, so we're not obsessing over our ex. I've used it for that. I've also used it for like addictions. I've used it for a number of different things. But Kelley, she took my online program called "Quote Unquote Get Over a Breakup Fast," and she shared with me how valuable. She's like, I'm going to totally use this with a client who's going through a heartbreak, and then she took the ball and ran with it. And speaking of reverse engineering, she figured out how to reverse engineer it. And I'm like, you know what? I never thought of doing it that way, and came up with all kinds of really interesting ways of using it. And yeah, it's one of those things that can be used for virtually anything. I say virtually because some things you probably had to get pretty creative, but I mean, well, Kelley's been very creative with it ever since she learned it. She's literally done more with it than I have, meaning in regards to using it with different things. I kind of clumped it into a select few, but wow, does she take the ball and run with it in multiple different directions. Yeah.
It's extremely flexible, and I found that all clients are responsive to it, which is great. So that means that it has even more applications. I've had great success with any kind of addiction or dependencies with it. I've been using it in sports performance. Joe, you will love this one. And again, it has that element of instruction to it, particularly one part of it, so that clients can replicate it for themselves if they start to run across these kinds of blocks in their own life. And it's fun. It's really interesting. And I think that it really lends itself to a lot of hypnotic pattern. And I enjoy that. I love to use the linguistics with clients because it really moves them in deeper into a more receptive state. And even what Kevin had said earlier, change the way that you think about things, changes the way that you feel about them. And I've even expanded on that on a just kind of a circular pattern. So we're just doing this 4-hour class in 3 weeks, and you're all welcome to join us. We even have a special coupon code there for a $10 discount on it too. So for anyone who has attended this, and I'll probably extend it into our Hypnotic Women group. The code is Hypnotic Women, but I just put that in the chat box, the link on it. It's pretty simple, the Super Swish. But if you're looking for something that's going to be novel, but also a little bit familiar too, so it's not a huge new learning curve. But I think what we're probably the strength of it is me and Kevin together, but also showing you all of the different applications and the nuances of how you can use it. And we're going to have some practice there too, so that you can really get that hands-on experience. So anything else we need to share? Kevin's going to share that Circle of Excellence process with me, and I'll post that in our group later. Thank you very much.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a fun one, by the way. And I highly recommend that when you're watching it, you let yourself do it along. You get into it. There's a Chinese proverb that's always resonated with me, and I use this with clients a lot, which is tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I'll understand. And when I share that with clients, I usually say that quote in the beginning, and then I say, now I always like to structure that, or phrase this or rephrase it according to the context that I'm working with. And I do, and I'll just expand on it in different ways. And I'll say that, again, tell me and I'll forget, show me some testimonials. And okay, great. So they look like legit testimonials, but how do I know that's going to work for me? How do I know it worked for them? How do I know it's going to work for me? Involve me, give me an experience, a profound and undeniable experience. And now I finally understand. Now I really get it. Yeah. I think somebody asked what time the course is on the 6th, 10 a.m. Is that right? On the 6th?
10 a.m. Right.
Yeah.
We'll go from 10 to 2, and we'll have a little mid-break there too. But we should be using the breakout rooms and giving you guys lots of practice so that you can experience and learn that way. Well, Kevin, this has been fantastic. That's Pacific time here on the West Coast. So I don't know if UK, if you're 8 hours ahead of us or 9, I always forget what the time frame, but it will be archived for replay for people later who can't attend in person, but it's so fun to be there in person. Kevin, thank you so much for being my guest here today. And ladies, thank you for being here and asking the great questions and enjoying Kevin's wisdom. So you're 8 hours ahead there in the UK. There, Vanessa answered. Yeah. And I look forward to seeing you people somewhere along the way besides online. And I hope everybody continues to thrive and keep doing what you're doing. You're awesome, all of you. Kevin, you're awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Go and have a great weekend.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. That was awesome.